Welcome back to another episode of Combat Step. Before we delve into the depths of the multiverse, continue supporting our channel in its quest to bring you more thrilling content. By becoming a patron supporter, you'll gain access to exclusive perks and help us continue to create top-notch videos. Be sure to use our Dragon Shield and Ink Gaming affiliate links in the description when you purchase your next set of products. Don't forget to follow us on social media and stay updated on the latest news, deck techs, and community discussions. And of course, make sure to subscribe to our channel to join the ever-growing community of fellow Planeswalkers. With your support, we'll continue to explore the boundless possibilities of Magic the Gathering together. Today we're going to take a look at a build of Azlask the Swelling Scourge. This is one of the new commanders that came out with Modern Horizons 3. It is actually not the face commander of the deck, but it is the secondary commander. So Azlask costs 3 mana to cast. Whenever Azlask or another colorless creature you control dies, you get an experience counter. And then you can pay all 5 colors as many times as you want and have the ability to do so. And creatures you control get +X till end of turn, where X is the number of experience counters you have. And then your spawns and scions that you control gain indestructible and Annihilator 1. So we are going to be trying to make a bunch of spawn and scion tokens to ultimately buff them up and attack. Not to mention they also are a good mana source for us. So let's take a look at how this deck is built, starting with creatures. We do run 28 creatures in the deck. Our first creature is Blister Pod. It costs 1 green to cast. When it dies, you put a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion onto the field. Nest Evader costs 2 mana to cast, and when it enters the battlefield, you create a spawn. Catacomb Sifter costs 3 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you put a Eldrazi spawn on the battlefield, and when another creature you control dies, you scry 1. Chittering Dispatcher has Myriad, and when it leaves the battlefield, you create an Eldrazi spawn, which is going to trigger from the Myriad. You attack, you make a copy of it, and when the copies leave, depending on how many opponents you have, you would make an Eldrazi spawn. So it's a great attacker in our deck. Eldrazi Linebreaker has Trample, and then at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gains haste and +X/+O till end of turn, where X is the number of Eldrazi you control. Eldrazi Sky Spawner has Flying, one of the few cards in our deck that does have Flying, and when it enters, you make an Eldrazi Scion. Glaring Frustraker, when you cast a color spell, you make a Eldrazi spawn, and then when another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this is a way to slowly ping the table and hopefully be able to make some headway in the game over the course of the game. Mirror Entity is a changeling, so it actually is an Eldrazi, and you can pay X as many times as you can, and until end of turn, creatures you control have a base power and toughness of XX, and they also gain all creature types. Scion Summoner, when it enters the battlefield, you make an Eldrazi Scion. Eyeless Watcher, when it enters the battlefield, you put 2 Scions onto the field. Incubator Drone, when it enters the battlefield, you put 1 Eldrazi Scion. Kozilek's Predator makes an all Scion, makes 2 Scions. Now Marin is here for a couple reasons. One, we wanted a way to also capitalize on experience counters besides just our commander. So Marin does do that, and then Marin also lets us return creatures from our graveyard, so it's a little bit of recursion for us. They either go to our hand or to our battlefield, which possibly, depending on the creature, would trigger the ETB effect if it has one. So Marin's a good little redundancy for us. It's not obviously an Eldrazi, but it does give us some recursion and some use out of the experience counters outside of just our commander. Minthara does the same thing for us in terms of being able to use the experience counters. It has Ward X, where X is the number of experience counters, so it makes it harder and harder to remove Minthara. At the beginning of our end step, a permanent we left, we get an experience counter, so that's going to help, especially if we have that and our commander out. It's going to really make our experience counters go up quickly. And then creatures we control get +1/+1/+1/+0 for each experience counter we have, so it helps to pump up our creatures too, in addition to the effect that our commander has if we aren't able to pay that mana. Writhing Chrysalis, when you cast the spell, you create 2 Eldrazi spawns, and then whenever you sacrifice an Eldrazi, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Brood Butcher, When it enters the battlefield, you put a Eldrazi Scion on the battlefield, and you can pay a black and a green, sacrifice a creature, and target creature gets -2/-2 till end of turn. Dread Drone, when it enters the battlefield, you create 2 spawns. Emrakul's Hatcher, when it enters the battlefield, you create 3 spawns. Spawn Gang Commander, when you cast the spell, you put 3 spawns on the battlefield, and then you can pay a colorless and 1 and sacrifice an Eldrazi, and Spawn Gang Commander deals 2 damage to any target. Yarok is here because it's going to help with us as it's Death Touch and Lifelink, so we can gain a little bit of life, but also if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability to happen, it triggers an additional time, so this, since most of our things have ETB triggers, would allow them to trigger more and get us more spawns, more mana, more experience counters quickly. Angelic Aberration is a flyer and it has vigilance, which is nice, and when it enters the battlefield, you sacrifice any number of creatures with power or toughness 1 or less, and then you create that many 4/4 colorless Eldrazi angel tokens that have flying and vigilance, so we can sacrifice a bunch of our spawns or scions, which is okay for us. We get experience counters possibly, and then they also become flyers. Brood Monitor, when it enters the battlefield, we create 3 scions. Drowner of Hope, when it enters the battlefield, we create 2 scions, and then we can sacrifice an Eldrazi Scion to tap a target creature. Eldrazi Ravager has Annihilator 1. We can sacrifice 2 Eldrazi to return it to our hand out of our graveyard, and it has cycling too, so it's got a lot of uses, which is great. Birthing Hulk, when it enters the battlefield, we put 2 Scion creatures on the battlefield, and we can pay a colorless and 1 to regenerate the Birthing Hulk. Drowner of Truth is here for 2 reasons. 1, it is a creature possibly. When we cast it, if we use colorless mana, we create 2 Eldrazi spawns, but it also has a flip side, Drowned Jungle, which is a land. So depending on where we're at in the game, we can play it for the creature side if we have the mana or the need. Otherwise, we just play it as a land, and it taps for both of our 2 colors that we might need, so that's helpful. Spawnbed Protector, at the beginning of our end step, we return 1 target Eldrazi creature card from our graveyard to our hand, and we create 2 Eldrazi Scions. Craterhoof is here, obviously not as an Eldrazi, but it is here as a way to potentially do a big attack. It has haste, and when it enters the battlefield, creatures that we control get trample, +X on a turn, where X is the number of creatures we control. So late game, maybe we have a bunch of spawns and scions, and then we attack with it. Maybe 5, 6, whatever it is, just to get some good damage through, possibly take out a player. It's a good finisher. Sorceries in the deck, we do have Tutors and Ramp. We want to make sure we have the colors we need, and having the lands is better than having artifacts, especially with effects like Farewell. We don't want to get blown out of the water by having someone exile all artifacts, and then we just don't have very many lands. So all of our sorceries are either a tutor to help tutor up something we may need, or land ramp, so that we can have our colors that we might need in case we're trying to activate our commander's ability, or just to make sure we have enough lands to be able to do things consistently each turn, and thin our deck a little bit too. Instances are all interaction. You'll see counter spells, you'll see removal, tutors. One of the cool pieces of tech that we've added is Ugin's Binding. It is basically a Psych Rift. You pay 3 mana, and you can return a permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, and then this goes to your graveyard. When you cast a color spell mana value 7 or greater, you could exile Ugin's Binding from your graveyard, and you return each non-land permanent you don't control. So it is basically an overloaded Psych Rift, and you don't have to do this. So you could cast a 7 mana value creature and not choose to do Ugin's Binding, and then later on in the game cast a different one and choose Ugin's Binding at that time if there's actually things worth you wiping. And then otherwise we just run counters and removal. Things like Deflecting Swat is a way to try to protect our pieces. Artifacts, again, like I mentioned earlier, we are really light on our artifacts because, one, we want to make sure we have the land ramp we need rather than artifact, but we do have mana rocks. Decanter of Endless Water is here just because it does give us no maximum hand size. Commander Sphere lets us draw a card, so it's got a little bit of a multi-use here, which is why they're in the deck. Enchantments, we have a variety of enchantments. We have things like Aggravated Assault, so if we have a good amount of Scions and we have them all buffed up and they're getting Annihilator, and we have the mana, we could potentially take another combat, annihilate our opponents again, and maybe win the game that way. Awakening Zone makes us Eldrazi Scions, spawns. Kozilek's Unsealing gives us some card draw. It helps us also make some spawns. Rhystic Studies here for obvious card draw reasons. From Beyond makes us some Scions, and then we can pay a green and a 1 to sacrifice it and search for an Eldrazi card. Path of Annihilation makes us Eldrazi spawns. It makes all of our Eldrazi tap for mana, and then it gives a little bit of life gain for us. Smothering Tithe helps to ramp us, give us some mana over the course of the game, or is a good removal target because people are going to want to remove it, so they would use that removal on something like Smothering Tithe, hopefully, and not one of our other creatures and threats. Virtue of Knowledge is here for 2 reasons. We can use the instant side of it to copy a triggered ability if we really want, or we can play it for the enchantment side and it gives us another effect. It does the same thing. It would cause the ability to trigger an additional time, so maybe we're making even more spawns and scions out of our cards. Lands are pretty much what you would expect. We're trying to balance out 5 colors in this deck, so we do run all the shock lands, all the fetch lands. We are running things like Bojuka Bog as a piece of graveyard removal, Beseiju as another piece of removal or land, Cavern of Souls to possibly make an Eldrazi uncounterable, Otawara is another piece of removal or land, Reliquary Tower just gives us no maximum hand size, which is an added benefit, especially if we're starting to get to a good point where we're playing a little bit slower and we're not casting and vomiting our hand all over the table. This allows us to play a little bit better and have things in our hand when we need them. Takasia's Dig Site is a favorite of mine. Yes, you can pay 3 mana to Surveil 1, which is a little bit on the high side, but the Surveil is great, especially if you end up getting through a pocket of lands. You could do this on somebody's end step right before your turn, so it doesn't really impact your turn, and get through pocket lands, or at least know you're drawing into then something useful for your next turn. So it's pretty versatile. I recommend it. It's great in Commander, especially on somebody's end step. If you have experience playing Azlask, or you have other cards that you would recommend and think would be great in the deck that we left out, please let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear some of your feedback, some of your suggestions, as well as how the deck has gone for you and your play group. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a like, share it with your friends, subscribe to our channel, and ring that bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming content. This episode was brought to you by our friends at Dragon Shield. We will be giving away some of our Dragon Shield sleeves. Be sure to use our Dragon Shield affiliate link in the comments below when you make purchases from Dragon Shield. Every little bit of support helps our channel keep growing.